Hello, everyone. It's Lydia with the Global Travel Junkie podcast and YouTube channel. And today I'm excited to bring back one of our returning guests. I'm sitting here today with Fernando Diez. Hi, Fernando.
Hi, Lydia. Great to be back.
Yeah, so I'm so glad. I'm excited about our topic. So if any of y'all have been listening to my channel, you might remember Fernando. He's with Expeditions, and we had a whole podcast about the Galapagos first, and then we did Patagonia, and they were so fun. And I asked Fernando if he would come back and like really drill into the topic of ecotourism and being sustainable and responsible to Mother Earth. So today, that's what we're going to talk about. And we're hoping from this podcast that we inspire others to consider being more mindful when they're choosing how they're going to travel and what's the impact that they're going to leave through their travel decisions. So I'm not going to talk much more. I want Fernando to introduce the Quasar Expeditions himself. And also, we're going to dive into a few basic definitions after that. So go ahead, Fernando.
Great. Thank you, Lydia. Well, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Fernando Diez. I am the Director of Marketing at Quasar Expeditions, which is a family owned high end adventure travel company based in Ecuador and in Chile. It's family owned, started by my two parents back in 1986. We are second generation in this business. And when I say we, I have two other brothers, both in the business as well. We've lived and breathed tourism for as long as we can remember. We've been attached to the Galapagos, to Ecuador, and then myself personally, I moved down to Chile in 2011. Got to know Patagonia, the region, and been very attached and try to really implement the same sort of like travel philosophy and the same sort of responsible travel that we offer in Galapagos in Patagonia. So that's what we've been doing for the last 37 years. And we've seen the change happen. We've seen the change that tourism brings in these destinations. My two parents started Quasar because they wanted to show Galapagos to the world. And they knew that it was through tourism that these islands could be preserved, right? So you might think, the way to preserve these islands, well, yes, the best way is to leave them alone and not even, mind them. Nobody visit the Galapagos and just this jewel floating in the Pacific, right? But that wasn't going to happen. And the second best alternative is to bring travelers, educate them on what's happening in Galapagos, show them this precious ecosystem that has been untouched for so long, and have really tourism take care of the islands. And that's really what has happened since we started, since 1986. Tourism has been responsible largely for the preservation and the education of the world population on the how precious the Galapagos are. But also at the same time, tourism brings some baggage as well. The fact that most of the people in Galapagos, they depend on tourism. It's very attractive to work in Galapagos, much higher wages than other parts of the continent. So you have people flowing to the islands, more waste. Galapagos does not have potable water. You have all these people generating waste. What do you do? Because there aren't recycling centers in the Galapagos. So there's a fine balance, and there's a real role that travel companies have to play today, not only in the Galapagos, but everywhere, to preserve these destinations. Before it was, I would say, like an optional thing. Maybe you were one of these companies that was more on the sustainability side, and there were others that were not. Today, I think it's the basics. You have to be socially and environmentally responsible. And you said something very interesting at the very beginning, Lydia, that it's, in the end, it's up to the travelers, the people who invest their dollars to educate themselves on who they're traveling with, and make sure the companies that they choose are responsible, that their dollars go a longer way, And, that's what we're here to talk about today, tell you a little bit about what Quasar is doing, and hopefully, set some standards for what sustainable and eco travel should be, not only in Latin America, but everywhere in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Just being more, that's a good point. Like it's not, I've been in the sustainability conversation for about 15 years in my local city. And so, we're always thinking about you you make decisions with where you spend your money, and that's when the people that you're, giving your money to hopefully are helping to extend the efforts that you care about for the planet. And that's where it all lies. We have the power to make those decisions. You just need to find the right entities that are doing it. So that's why we're talking about it. Not only does Quasar do it, but I think that you're a good person to have this dialogue with, because it's been so important to y'all's mission for so long that you have a lot of history with that. So with that said, can we just get a baseline? Let's talk about what is ecotourism. How is it considered as, defined? I mean, you and I both can add to that. And then let's talk about what does that mean from a sustainability for anyone who may not be in this conversation of sustainability. And then we'll dive into what Quasar is doing as to give examples of how companies can make choices.
Perfect. Yeah. So as far as I'm aware, the term ecotourism refers mainly to being the ecological part of business, right? So there are, at least for Quasar, there are three pillars that we actually support. One is the environmental pillar, the other is the social pillar, and the third is the economic pillar. And when you combine these three, this is where you can really drive a solid, sustainable initiative. Focusing just on one and neglecting the others doesn't really work. It happened in Galapagos for a very, very long time, where basically, and this is not judging, it's basically when you go there as a tourist, right? And you're immersed with the wildlife and the islands, and you see all these amazing animals, the first thing you want to do is protect the animals, right? And so a lot of money flowed into the conservation of wildlife, reintroduction of species, elimination of introduced species. That part remains until today probably the strongest area in Galapagos. But you also have that other pillar, the social pillar. What about all these people that live in Galapagos, that work in the tourism industry? What about the waste that is generated? What about the living conditions? Galapagos has a huge problem with domestic abuse, believe it or not, but that is something that the average traveler doesn't see. However, as the companies involved there, and with our offices and our team living in the Galapagos, we realize that that's an area where we have to focus on as well. And the living conditions for those people. And then finally, that third pillar, the economic pillar, is being responsible with how we as a company invest and where we buy the products from. We could easily, and probably it would be more affordable to go to these large supermarket chains and negotiate low prices with higher volume for the stuff we buy. But we choose to go as local as we can with Galapagos buying. If it's available in Galapagos, we buy it there, probably for twice the price from the mainland. But it's our responsibility to do that, right? And so when you align those three pillars, when you have projects,
Oh, looks like he'll pop on here in a second. Looks like something happened with his internet, and he's going to pop back on here really quickly. So I want to thank you all for caring about the planet like we do. And that's why we're having this conversation, so that more people will be aware of what is required when you are thinking about your travel selection. So, for instance, in a previous podcast with Fernando, he was explaining how there are ships that have, like 500 people that can tour the Galapagos. And that just ends up being like too many people at one time, exiting onto here he comes, exiting onto the islands and trampling all over the land. And so, somebody like Quasar is a 16 or so room yacht. And I think the most people that I remember that can be on their boats are like 32 people. So it's just a much more ecological way of traveling to the Galapagos. So when you popped off, Fernando, and let me move you back over here. When you popped off, I just shared I knew you were coming back on, and I just shared with the audience that we appreciate that they're willing to listen to this conversation. And what I just started to explain how you would explain to me about, a big boat that can go to the Galapagos that has hundreds of people coming off the ship and trampling all over the islands. And so choosing someone like, the smaller yacht with 32 people coming on board is, one way of helping to be sustainable when you choose to go visit the Galapagos. So that's all. I was just buying time till you could come back onto the call. Did your internet just drop?
I have no idea. I apologize, but it didn't seem like it was an internet issue. I don't
It's
know if it was the
okay. I mean,
browser.
things happen, and we're just going to roll with it because our listeners, are kind and compassionate, and I filled in the
But
space.
your point was, it's very good. So the cruising industry, it's all about economies of scale. You see those 3,000 passenger ships, cruising around the world because they're extremely profitable, right? The cost of operating a 1,000 passenger versus a 3,000 passenger ship are not very different, but of course you get all the revenues, right? But then what the other side of the coin is, what's the impact of those 3,000 passengers in a place like Venice, for example, right? And the same thing happens in Galapagos, where you have these 100 passenger ships that today are, for the most part, owned by international cruise companies. So, Silver Sea, Celebrity, their model obviously relies on bigger ships. These are their quote unquote intimate ships, right? But an intimate ship in Galapagos is really what Quasar offers, 16 or 32 guests. Because, disembarking 100 visitors on one site that they're very fragile in Galapagos is very different from disembarking with only 16 or 32 guests. The amount of waste produced by all the crew to serve 100 guests, makes a difference. So again, when you choose to travel with in small yachts, you're obviously creating a lighter footprint because of the number of guests you travel with, but also most of the small ships in Galapagos and the intimate yachts are owned by local companies. So taxes are being paid locally. It's all, a circular economy. So you're being more responsible in that respect as well.
Yeah. And you know what? I feel like we kind of already defined sustainability when you were explaining the pillars. I feel like that kind of basically defines what is sustainability. And I'll just say from my perspective, and I've kind of mentioned this, it's being mindful about the impact that you make in whatever you're doing. In my background, I was part of the greenest restaurant in the USA. And that meant we did 400 things to, mitigate the impact that the restaurant industry makes on the planet. And actually, it's the dirtiest contributor to landfill waste is all those single-use plastics that every little ketchup bag or every little container of mustard or like every fork, every, container of to-go food, it's like such a contributor to waste. And so when you can be more mindful about how you do your business, we paid more money for the eco containers and not the styrofoam ones, because the styrofoam ones don't, biodegrade. So just when you were talking about how y'all pay more for things in order to be more ecological and sustainable, we did too. And it hurt the pocketbook, but actually, to be honest with you, we were a very financially successful restaurant, because there are more people out there that care about that than you realize. And so it's just,
Yes.
this is the message we want to get out, is that there are ways to live your values when you're traveling and choosing a mindfulness of the planet, like with the Quasar Expedition, whether it's Patagonia or the Galapagos, which we'll talk about in our examples, is a great way to, live your values while you're traveling.
100%, Lydia. And we're happy to see people asking more and more. It's like, so let me know, what are you doing to, protect the Galapagos? Like, where does my money go in the end? And if you ask that question, right there, you're a great fit for Quasar, because we want that kind of traveler. We want the travelers that, don't come to our destinations and just to check them off the list, but they become ambassadors or evangelists for these destinations, and they spread the word. They spread the word on good companies, on the positive impact that's being made. They donate to the right projects. Coming to on a trip at Quasar, part of the profits go to these projects that we'll talk about in a little bit. But also, in the end, Quasar matches that.
Wow.
The any donations made by guests after the fact are matched by Quasar. And so not
Wow.
only do the profits of your trip contribute, but if there's a specific project, some people are really touched, for example, by what we do with the school for the children with special needs in Galapagos, or maybe some are touched by what the project of the Galapagos whale shark. And depending on their interest, they will donate money, and then Quasar matches that in the end. So if our guests contribute, we're happy to do that too. That is a win-win for everybody. And in the end, the organizations that we work with are extremely happy to work with us. We are with them, and they're protecting this place that is, what allows us to have a business. So it's like paying a little rent, right, for these wonderful
That's
places that we visit.
fascinating. I'm so impressed. I didn't even know that. That is so fascinating. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. So, do you want to dive in? And I feel like the listeners will get a feeling for Quasar as you use examples from the things that you're talking about. So, why don't we dive into some of those nonprofits that you are contributing to? And then when you share about the nonprofit and what they do, you can also fit in, what Quasar is doing in your stories.
Yeah, perfect. So let's start with one that was very close to what you mentioned. So what we do in terms of like the food that we purchase on our ships, all right? So we've been single-use plastic free, I believe, for about 6 years now. And that is incredible how much less waste actually comes out of our ships when we eliminated those single use. That made a huge difference. Plus, that plastic that was being generated, from the operation was not able to be recycled. There's a very small recycling facility in Galapagos, so it was basically staying there, and it was terrible. So that was the first thing. Then we partnered with the World Wildlife Fund on an initiative that they had that was called the Zero Waste Initiative. Is how can we, through all the meals that we offer, our restaurant service, produce as little waste as possible in terms of just food waste. And so they did an evaluation. It wasn't very good, to be completely honest. When they evaluated, we were producing a lot of
There was room for
a lot of food
improvement,
was going to
basically.
waste. Yeah. And so through these chefs that they work with, we actually were able, with the leftovers, right, untouched leftovers, like not something that people put on their plate, but something that, for example, was left in the buffet or back in the kitchen, create these wonderful recipes, and different kinds of food for the crew, where they didn't feel like they were eating leftovers. It was, some of them were actually even tastier than what was being served to the guests, and it was
The
so
flavors
these
were so
chefs,
good.
I know, these chefs that work on this initiative with the World Wildlife Fund are fantastic, and they specialize in this. So the result of that was just such a reduction of waste, and the separation of waste, and the classifying waste on board, and what was happening afterwards. A lot of that waste we were able to send back to the mainland to be recycled, and so that was a wonderful project, and that was something really neat that we did on the environmental pillar. Also on the environmental pillar is what we've been doing to locally eat locally sourced and sustainably caught, fish, for example. So in Galapagos, illegal fishing is a huge problem. If you are not mindful of who you buy from, right? And the same thing that we were talking about, as travelers have the responsibility to ask these companies, what they do for the environment, we have that responsibility to buy fish from people who fish sustainably, who have their fishing licenses, who would never catch, food that is like lobsters, when they're not in season and things like that.
Or when they're making babies.
Exactly. That's super, super important for the preservation of the population
Right.
of
For the
all these.
continuation.
Yeah, exactly. So being respectful of that is super important. And the same thing, not everything can be produced in Galapagos. So we do need to buy a lot of food from the mainland, but making sure that if it's produced in Ecuador by a small family or a small farmer, and we can obtain it that way. And they, these guys, a client like Quasar for them might represent, 50% of what they produce. So they take such good care of us, and we in turn take such good care of them. The food is always delivered on time. They deliver it to the center where it's then distributed and packaged and sent to Galapagos. And so it's a win-win for everybody. Maybe people fear that these small producers won't be as responsible as one of the large companies. Like, on the contrary, these guys, if they need to be there at 5 a.m. to deliver the stuff because there's no space in the 9 a.m. flight or
Yeah,
whatever,
or
they
if you're
they'll
ordering
show up.
organic, they're actually doing it right, right? If you're
Exactly.
ordering, special no chemical, lettuces or something.
Exactly. Exactly. So on the same pillar, on the environmental pillar, moving down to Patagonia, for example, there was a massive fire in 2011 where about half of Chile's Torres, or a third, sorry, of Chile's Torres del Paine National Park was burned.
Mm.
But this gave rise and the birth of Reforest Patagonia. So it's the largest reforestation effort in Chilean history, and Quasar was a contributor of Reforest Patagonia from the very beginning. There's a forest called the Quasar Forest in Torres del Paine. Every guest that travels with us plants their own tree there, and we're doing our part to sort of try and make up for this fire that unfortunately still very much, the consequences of it are very much visible in the park, but we're doing our part. And of course, we travel through these national parks as everybody does on vehicles.
Right.
We make sure that all the emissions of our vehicles are offset through the carbon fund. We calculate, through the vehicle models and the mileage that they run, every season. We pay our part for different efforts that pretty much compensate for that carbon offsetting. And then this project is in the works, not yet a reality, but hopefully soon. Carbon offsetting is cleaning up your own mess, right? But for so many years, nobody offset, and there's such a mess today, in the air, climate change and all that, from all this carbon that's been produced that hasn't been offset. And there are projects like Tomorrow's Air that they actually do carbon sequestration. So they capture carbon from the environment and they bury it under the earth, and
Yeah, they pump it
really,
underground.
exactly. And that makes a difference. That's really the cleanup that needs to happen. So
It's
the
amazing.
basics the basics are compensation, carbon compensation. So make sure you clean your own mess, and then going a step further, and doing the part of the companies that are not responsible and trying to sequester all this carbon that's in the air. So these projects are extremely costly. They need a lot of funding, but they are, at least in my mind, part of the solution for this climate change problem that we're seeing.
Do you know if any other, I don't want you to name their names, but like if there are any other companies that are similar in tourism that are doing what y'all are doing, or are y'all considered unique?
No, thankfully, yes, there are many. And then there are some that are, they're at
Not.
another level.
Oh,
Yeah, at another level in both ends of the spectrum, right? There are some that are not doing anything. And in that respect, I do want to make one small distinction. And I heard this once, that we were doing a site inspection of a hotel in Patagonia. And the guy that was doing it, he said he studied ecotourism. And he said, to be a sustainable company, you have to be a stable company first, right? And what happens often is we get sort of like enamored with this notion that we need to be sustainable and we need to contribute to carbon offsetting, and we're not yet, our companies may not be yet profitable, and we're investing all this money in offsetting and these different initiatives, where in the end, if you want to be sustainable, you'll find a way. And perhaps maybe in the first year or two, you're not as sustainable as you want because you're getting your business off the ground. But the effect that that will have when you're actually a stable company economically, the effect that you can have 2 years down the road when you have enough money to invest on these projects, it's like, working at the beginning with a shovel, and then when the company is profitable, then you have a bulldozer, right? And then the effect is a lot bigger. So if there's anybody listening here, for example, that is starting their company, or that they are worried about these projects, I definitely recommend to make sure your business is up and running and profitable, and then go hard at becoming sustainable. Quasar at the beginning was exactly like that. We did very little for to support. We always supported the different organizations, but we did very little ourselves to try and dig deep and contribute to the community and things like that. But as we got profitable, that's when the change started to happen. And so I really want to make that distinction. And then, as you asked, there are companies, Lydia, that are just at another level with what they're doing. Massive funds. Africa is a great example. The Singida hotels, the Chilean hotels, it's a huge project. They have a huge conservation fund, and they're doing amazing work. We'd like to get there one day, and so they're kind of like a role model for us. But they exist at all levels, and
yeah.
you just have to start somewhere, right?
And the point of this particular episode is just that we want to bring it front of mind for people. We want people to make this a consideration when they're making a decision, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a particular company. Just choose a company that is being good to Mother Earth and the climate and the impact that they're making on the tourism that they are doing. Are there any other organizations that are like a big shout out that you want to give a little bit of a credit to, that you're working with, the nonprofits? I know that you have a whole page, like a whole navigation button on your website, which, by the way, is quasarex.com. And you can there's a tab that's called sustainability. You're not just a little paragraph like, oh, we're sustainable and we do XYZ. Y'all are dedicating a whole massive communication about all the ways that you're being sustainable. So is there any of those nonprofits I saw listed and all the logos at the bottom of the people your partners that you call them, that you're working with, that you want to give a shout out or explain what they're doing?
Yeah, so we've always been a big contributor of the Charles Darwin Foundation in the Galapagos. They do amazing work every year for conservation, for the local community. We've always been a big supporter. In the beginning, and most Galapagos companies support the Charles Darwin Foundation, for example, by donating a cabin that then the Charles Darwin Foundation sells, or hotel nights, for
Oh,
example, and then
like
those profits they use.
yeah.
But that is like the most basic way to contribute, right? It really doesn't take much effort, and of course, it represents an important amount of money. So I would definitely start there. But we've gone way further with different projects, with supporting projects like the elimination of there's a mosquito that has almost made extinct the mangrove finch in Galapagos, and it's an invisible pest that, of course, the scientists know this, but nobody really is aware. But this mosquito lays it's a fly, lays their eggs on the chicks, and the larvae end up going through the ear and they kill the chicks. And it's been such a huge threat that the population has decreased so much that they are on the verge of extinction. So being able to support projects like that need a massive amount of funding, being able to create awareness about those projects is super.
But what do they do? Do they raise those babies in an environment that's a closed environment so the mosquitoes can't get to them?
No, unfortunately, that wouldn't be enough for the level of
So what are they doing
destruction.
to keep them from becoming extinct?
It's, believe it or not, introducing other species that
Oh,
actually kill
that kill the
these.
mosquito. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
but
We
at
did.
the end, they're introduced species as well, so you don't know how they are going to react, maybe with another species. So it's a very fragile
Circle of life.
game to play, right? Yeah.
Yes, it is. I want to go back. I'm going to ask a nosy question, and you can say, no, I don't want to answer that, but I want to ask it. I'll create a little bit of mystery for my guest. I try to ask the questions that people are wondering about. So, if a room gets donated for a fundraiser, about how much does one room get auctioned off for and raise for what's the value that can raise when you give a room away for? Is that like a 14-day room or a 7-day room?
Yes. So normally, for example, when we donate a room, the normal rate for, I'm going to give you like an average. All right. So it would be like $16,000 for the room for the week. So about $8,000 per person.
Mm-hmm.
Normally in auctions, they go for a little bit less than that, right? Because otherwise the people could just buy it. But sometimes in these auctions, you have these bidding wars. And
Yeah.
I believe it was like 5 or 6 years ago, there was a bidding war for the Grace Kelly suite on one of our yachts.
Oh,
and it went
cool. Yeah.
all the way to 250, believe it or not. So the
Wait, hold on.
nonprofit,
250,000?
$1,000, yeah.
Wow.
So the nonprofit that we had donated the room to came back to us ecstatic that they had sold the room for $250,000.
Oh my
It was a
God. You
bidding
had the
war
right
between,
people in that room.
yeah, exactly. And it was two people that had plenty of money, and they knew in the end where the money was going. So it was, and there was like an ego
I
thing
love
happening there.
that.
And it worked really, really well. So it depends on the audience, but in general, for example, like a donation face value of like $16,000 normally would sell for around like 12 or 13.
Okay.
13,000.
Good. Well, that's a
So
great contribution that y'all can make.
yeah, like for the Charles Darwin Foundation, it might be half a year's salary for some of their more basic employees. So it definitely helps.
That's awesome. Okay, so final request for shout outs. Anybody else you want to mention? Any other nonprofits that are doing sustainable things or describing what they do to be sustainable?
I'd like, well, I'll do a shout out of one of more of these, which is the Galapagos Whale Shark Project. This is an amazing project. It was actually one of our former guides, together with his daughter and a whole team. They have a project where they monitor the migration patterns and the health of Galapagos whale sharks in the Galapagos Marine Reserve. And recently they did I believe it was the first ultrasound of whale shark together with a Japanese team.
What?
And because it's females that are traveling, they wanted to know exactly how far along one of these females was, and they did the first ultrasound project.
Uh-huh.
They're actually using AI to match spots and
Wow.
really determine if they're seeing the same whale shark, if it's a different one, if it isn't tagged, of course. If it is tagged, of course they know where it is, where it has gone. Unfortunately, during COVID, when we had that
They
invasion
locked down. Oh.
of the Chinese fishing fleet
Oh.
that invaded the Galapagos Marine Reserve and went there illegally. Um, I'm I'm going to lie about the speed, for example, but let's say a whale shark travels at 8 knots or something like that. They recorded it traveling at around 16 or 12 or 14, which indicated that it was fish brought up on a ship, and then
Oh,
the
carried
transponder
off.
was discarded. Yeah. So this whale shark that they had monitored for a long time, they know for a fact that it was illegally fished by this fleet in the Galapagos,
Oh my
and sold.
God.
The fins were sold
They
for.
did that while everybody was like home in COVID times and not
Yes,
protecting the
exactly.
waters.
Unfortunately, the one of the sad parts about COVID in the Galapagos is, all these cruises and yachts that are circling the archipelago every day. They serve also as a way to monitor illegal boats
Yeah.
coming into the reserve. So there was nobody to do that. The Ecuadorian Navy did not have the funds to go out to the northern islands where the whale sharks are, and that's where the fleet, illegally fished that whale shark. Who knows how many more? Plus, all those massive schools of hammerheads that are in Galapagos. So that
But
was a very
are
sad
they
thing.
doing anything with them, or are they just catching them and going, "Oh, we got the wrong thing"? Were they trying to get a whale shark?
I don't know if they were specifically trying to, but
Like in their
they'll take
nets?
one. Yeah,
Yeah.
but they'll take one. They do actively go after whale sharks. I don't know if in this specific case, if they were in that part of Galapagos, they were for sure trying to fish, the big schools of Galapagos hammerheads, to sell the fins for shark fin soup.
Oh my
Um,
God.
and maybe, the whale shark was caught in the net. We don't know exactly, or maybe whale sharks. When they're in Wolf and Darwin Island, they're at a very low depth.
Shallow.
And they basically almost surface. So they're fish; they don't need to breathe, but they're very shallow. So you can actually see them. They could have been shot. I don't know, but the thing
Maybe they
is,
were being
the evidence.
chased, by
Yeah,
the
but
Navy, or I mean the boats.
yeah. So I want to, call out to the Galapagos Whale Show Project. They do amazing, amazing work. We're actually supporting the creation of a documentary about someone, from the Galapagos Whale Show Project and what they're doing, because through this documentary, we want to get the story of exactly what I mentioned to you right now out to the world, and telling people how important it is, to protect our world oceans, to expand marine reserves. The expansion of marine reserves is a political thing. Laws have to be passed for this. And thankfully, Ecuador has been amazing at this, to the point that the marine corridor that joins sort of like the Cocos a marine reserve in Costa Rica, which is also a sanctuary for sharks, and Galapagos, those two marine reserves have a corridor where these are international waters that can legally be fished. And the expansion of the Galapagos Marine Reserve reduced that corridor so much that the migration routes of most of these sharks and whale sharks are now protected. So this means you
Wow,
can't fish there anymore,
that's
and that's
great.
legislation, that's politics. So these organizations, they not only dedicate themselves to science, they have
They're
to,
lobbying.
be on the political, yeah, all the time.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh, you know what I want to do? I want to have you get me their links to anyone who wants to donate to these funds in your description, so people can just automatically click on a link and go make a donation to this message that we're giving that we're spontaneously, talking about, because it definitely wasn't. I don't use scripts, and this wasn't part of a specific plan. I'm just glad you mentioned it.
That would be
So
wonderful.
yeah, yeah. Oh God, I would love that. And so, I mean, I want to do whatever I can in my part. So, okay. So I know we talked about like a 30-minute, episode. So we'll kind of wrap it up. Okay. So I wanted to ask you, first of all, about any of that we already talked about. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you didn't mention that you want to squeeze in real quick? Cause um, I'm going to ask you at the end, if there's not anything you want to squeeze in, here's your question. What are the 3 questions we want to give our listeners to ask when they are choosing a tourism option? What are the kind of 3 sustainable, eco-friendly kind of questions they should ask when they're like, do you do this? Do you do that? How do you handle this? Where do you give money? Whatever. So give us like 3 questions. But before you do that, I'm going to give you a window to add anything I didn't ask you.
Perfect. Yes, just the last mention I want to make has to do with the people. In the end, I believe it was Baba Dioum who said this, that we only protect. Sorry, we can love only the things that we know, and we'll only protect the things that we love, right? And so, how can we expect the people of Galapagos to protect their home if they are not educated and aware of all these problems, and if they don't feel the support of these organizations that are in there as well? And so as Quasar, supporting the young kids of Galapagos, whether it's through the Boy Scouts project that we have, where they help clean up local beaches and things like that. These kids are the future of tomorrow. They might be in the seat of, maybe the head of the Galapagos National Park and in charge of the laws and the legislation related to the Galapagos National Park. So supporting these kids is super important. As I mentioned to you, at the beginning, there's a big problem of domestic violence in Galapagos. So making sure that, these kids grow up in stable families, that the issue of domestic abuse is addressed both for, women and children, is super important. And also, there's a small segment of the population of the children with disabilities in Galapagos that have largely been forgotten. And Quasar is a huge supporter of the school for the children with disabilities. The Beagle yacht that we talked about in the Galapagos episode, taking these kids, like Christmas at sea, when we took them out to navigate, with their families. Many of them have never been off of the islands where they were born, and really taking them to see their archipelago.
Wow.
So making sure we take care of the people, they will take care of Galapagos tomorrow. So we have to take care of them.
That's beautiful. I love that. And Christmas is coming up. Are y'all doing that again?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Is that like
we'll
a
be
yearly
doing
thing?
that? Yeah, and we'll post it on social media. So be sure to stay tuned for that.
Do y'all have any holiday specific packages or tours or anything that y'all do, differently during the holidays? Or is it just do y'all stop doing tours just so people can be at home? I mean, I don't.
No, actually, the most popular cruises, the ones that sell out the farthest in advance, are Christmas and New Year's.
Yeah, when people have time.
Yeah, they have time. They pay a premium to go in those dates, but at the same time, the crew members who have to spend Christmas, working, they also make a lot more in those weeks.
Oh,
So
good.
many of them
Yeah.
are
Good.
are happy
You're
to do
giving
that.
fair pay for their time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so this is not a financial question, so I'm not asking for a number, but you just made me think of a question. You said they pay like a premium during that time. If someone's looking for a Quasar expedition, but they want to pick the most economical months to go or time period, when is that y'all have like better deals?
That's a great question. So the Galapagos, because they're on the equator, as it relates to weather, there's really no better or worse time to go.
It's
The
constant.
islands have, yes, very good weather year round. However, there is a season that we call the secret season, and
Wait, I'm writing that one down. Let me get my
at
pen.
Quasar we call it the secret season, and other companies choose to call it the low season. And
Oh,
I'll tell you why we call it the secret season. So
I like that one.
60% of international travelers that enter Galapagos every year are from North America, USA, and Canada. 60%, right? And the general travel trends for North Americans is, there's like peak time to travel, which is summer, and then, Christmas and New Year's, and then you have maybe Easter, and well, there's a lot of travel in
The
Thanksgiving, but it's mainly
holidays.
domestic, right? So this quote unquote low season that we call the secret season falls right after the peak summer months. So from September up until early December, until the Christmas and New Year's holidays. What happens there is that you have amazing weather, you have probably the best snorkeling of all year. That for me is the favorite activity, so that your chances of playing with sea lions in the water, seeing marine iguanas feeding underwater, swimming with penguins, with sea turtles, that's guaranteed at this time of the year. um, with the added benefit that there are less crowds, because 60% of the market, is it's low season for North Americans to travel. So it is low season in the sense that it just associated with the travel trends for North America, but nothing to do with migration patterns of animals, nothing to do with weather or disfavorable conditions. So if you can travel in these months because there is less demand, you're likely to get discounts. For example, Quasar for next year is offering free Galapagos Air for those months. And it's a fantastic time to go. I don't think we've ever had anybody come back from traveling that time and say, I wish I would have gone a different time of year. That does not exist. So that is insider secret that is very
Wait,
useful for people
describe
who have that flexibility.
what is free Galapagos Air? Explain that.
So you cannot take an international flight to the Galapagos. So you have to fly first to mainland Ecuador, to either
Oh,
the cities of Quito or Guayaquil, and the domestic air from Quito or Guayaquil out to the Galapagos, that round trip airfare, which is around $500 per person,
uh-huh.
that is included in September and
Okay,
October
to
and
get on the
November. So
boat,
you could,
right? You're
yeah.
flying to
So
get
you
onto the boat.
exactly, you can save around $1,000 at that time of year, which is
Awesome.
fantastic. Yeah.
I love that. That's so cool. There's a little tip, you guys, for all of those who are going to plan your, retirement travel on Quasar Expeditions. So, all right, quickly, can you think of 3 questions that people should ask, or maybe what are people asking y'all when you're, because you mentioned that before, like we want to inspire people to ask about what a company's doing if they're going to make their selection of who to travel with. What are some things people can ask to ensure that they're making a mindful decision of
Yeah.
ecotourism?
Yep. And I think the first question, and you made me think of this because it's like the perfect question to ask somebody, is, you're talking to a company that you're interested in it, and ask them, what does it mean to be sustainable, right? Now, a company that understands the sustainability principle, when you are not greenwashing, right? When you say, oh yes, we're sustainable, and there's really nothing to back it up, is like, what does it mean, that Quasar is sustainable? And our sales team knows exactly, what we do. They can name all these projects. This is not marketing information that I have to try to, market this out and sell it. This is ingrained from top to bottom in our company. Everybody knows the projects that we're involved with. So I honestly think that if a company is true to themselves, and they are honestly and responsibly supporting, whether it's the environment, the economy, or the society where they work, they will be able to tell you what it means to be sustainable in that destination. So they will probably give you a list of the things that they do.
Yeah.
So that to me would be like a great question. What does it mean for you, to be
And
successful.
that probably encompasses all the three that I was going to say come up with. Because truthfully, if you just ask them, what are you doing to be sustainable? And they waver on that and go, can I hold for a few seconds and put you
Yeah.
on hold to find out? There's your answer.
Yes. And exactly. And when they name an organization, okay, and what do they do? Right.
Right.
And so to you, we all have an affinity most of the time for a specific direction, right? So whether it's the environmental pillar, the social pillar, or the economic pillar, I don't judge anybody that comes to Quasar and is only worried about the social pillar. It's like, what do you do for the society in Galapagos? Perfect, I'll list. And maybe they don't care what we do for the environment. And so we all have our affinity. If there's a specific area that you feel strongly about in Africa, almost always it's obviously the wildlife and the poaching, but at the same time, who are the people who are like Singida? They have an entire sort of like school and training program for the locals, who are the rangers and the protectors, and who are in the front lines, and who really are in danger every day. And so when you can bring this to light, the companies that'll do it will happily display this all over the website. And sometimes you will run into companies, and this is maybe just like a poor marketing, that they're doing a lot but not communicating it
Yeah, they're not.
efficiently.
Yeah.
And but you'll learn from the sales team, right? If you ask them, you'll learn.
Which is one of the things that I want to do on my other podcast, which I'm inviting you to be a guest on, is I want to highlight nonprofits who are doing things to make the world a better place. So my goal is to interview all these kinds of companies to get their message out, because I want people to donate to their organizations, and I want to provide a link below their video of ways to generate donations for their nonprofits. So thank you for that. So I feel like, do you feel like we had a good overview, a good old 360 of the sustainability conversation?
I think so. Yes. I think we've covered pretty much, what the things that Quasar does, why we do what we do. The why is super important. And that's where you really get the difference between greenwashing and the people who do it for the real reasons, where there's purpose behind this. When there's greenwashing, you do it to be able to sell an extra space. And that's when you'll notice, when you ask the sales team and they can't really answer that question that you and I just talked about. So I think I've addressed, these important points for people to keep in their mind, when they're choosing, and that, that in the end, it's just like voting, you make the difference. So your vote, you cast it to the company that's the most sustainable. And in the end, right, the best company should win in the end, because you're getting all the votes from these people who care.
At least they'll survive, right? So
Yeah.
help the good company survive. That's kind
Yeah.
of the goal for any company, right? Especially if you're doing good things for the planet. So thank you so much, Fernando, for hanging out with me today and being a three-time guest. You're like, I don't have anyone who's ever been on my podcast 3 times on this channel. So we love having you here. And thank you for spending your time with us and sharing about all the amazing things that Quasar Expeditions is doing. And again, do you want to tell people who want to connect with you at Quasar, tell them again the website, and then like if you have Instagram and your socials, share that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So if you want to check out more about Quasar, as Lydia said, that sustainability page tells you everything. It's quasarex.com. That's her main website. And then /sustainability if you want to go to that page. You can find us on Instagram at QuasarEX. On Facebook, we're at Quasar Expeditions. We're on Twitter, or X, again, as QuasarEX. But we're basically everywhere. If you type the social channel and Quasar Expeditions, you'll find us. If anybody listening is big on Facebook, join our Facebook group. There's a Facebook group that you have to be accepted to join, but anybody who's interested in Quasar and Galapagos and Patagonia can join that group. You just, past and future travelers and any guests are welcome. It's the Quasar
I need to
Expeditions
join
Facebook
that
group.
I'm
Please do.
I'm almost part of the family.
Thanks again, Lydia, for having me back. I'm happy to be your first time, 3-timer here.
Have you ever seen that SNL skit where they wear the 5-time jacket? I feel like I need to get you a jacket or something with, some stars on your shoulder. So I just want to tell everyone who's just like driving and listening to us that Quasar is spelled QUASAR and then EX.com. Okay. Exactly. So thank you again. And I will see you soon. Please stay in touch, Fernando, and we'll see you online.
Will do. Thanks, Lydia.
Bye.
Bye.